For the safety of listeners at home, following guidelines specified by the MPAA for film as a baseline, the following reading will be rated PG for scenes of fantasy violence and some dark imagery. The text read comes from a slightly earlier version of the novel. As such, wording may be different in certain places compared to the final published text. However, the author has endeavored to make sure that the reading and the novel are as close as possible. The Knight and the Unicorn. Chapter 8. Rosalyn's Decision. The news that Tristan and Rosalyn had returned from the enchanted forest spread like wildfire. The doctor told their worried parents, who didn't believe it until they saw for themselves. They told the priest and all their friends, and with the priest singing praises for their safe return and the friends spreading gossip in the marketplace, the whole town was suddenly in awe of the young lovers. It was, for the most part, their dreams come true. Questions abounded as to what happened in the woods and why they had come back beaten and battered in the middle of the night. It didn't help that there weren't many details from the duo themselves. How did they get back? How come Tristan was knocked out and seemed to be almost in a coma? How come both of them were scarred and bruised and beaten? Where did Tristan find the set of armor? Where did the amulet come from that Rosalyn wore? And the doctor didn't try to pry, only doing his duty as best as he could, without either patient willing to tell him what happened, so he didn't have any information to relay. Rosalyn and Tristan weren't telling anyone. Rosalyn was treated for exhaustion and malnourishment and went through a period of just over a week where she didn't eat much. She was finally released from the doctor's care when she ate a full day without vomiting, and went home to her grateful mother and father. Tristan, meanwhile, remained in the hospital, also being treated for exhaustion that took longer to go away, and a broken arm that needed to be bandaged for almost 2 weeks. When he did recover, there was something off about him that the doctor could not explain. Once the release, the villagers pressed them for information. It was soon clear the two absolutely did not, or could not, want to talk about it themselves. Tristan had a distant, melancholy look about him, and he would eagerly begin his tale only to stop and completely lose focus whenever he started describing the forests. Rosalyn, meanwhile, feigned ignorance, and stated she half blacked out on the return journey, and remembered nothing besides standing outside the doctor's with the bruised, cut, and beaten Tristan. They began to call the two they that had seen death, for they walked around like ghosts. None could blame them if they encountered the enchantress, and it was a settled fact among the villagers they had, given Rosalyn's strange disappearance. They were only happy they were home, and Rosalyn shared their well-wishing that she at least had Tristan back, though the more she heard, the more she worried about him. It was fairly obvious that Tristan, despite being grateful to be home and seemingly eager to work, was useless in the farm fields. If he ever went far into the wheat, corn, or farrow fields, he would go to the edge and stare in the direction of the forest before long. Even if startled out of his reverie, he would simply go back to staring a few minutes later. He ended up working around the barn and the warehouses, or in the closer cabbage and lettuce patches, the only places where he wouldn't be distracted. The evenings were even worse. He would seemingly retreat inside himself the later it got. Dinner was somewhat normal, aside from Tristan refusing to talk about what happened, but afterwards he would retreat to his room and do almost nothing. He was quiet and spent most of his evenings looking out to the window to the forest. On the eve of a weekend off, Rosalyn came over and spent the evening with Tristan's family to make sure he was doing all right. She had dinner with them, and Tristan seemed to liven up just a little bit, a development that made everyone happy. But after dinner, when Tristan and Rosalyn went to his room for a little quiet time, Tristan became quiet and sullen again. "Tristan," Rosalyn called out to him, "are you okay?" Tristan made no response. Rosalyn reached a hand over and put Tristan's hand over to her. "Are you sick?" There was a faint glimmer in Tristan's eyes. "No," he said, I'm fine." "No, you're not," Rosalyn said. "You're disturbed by something. I've heard your parents saying you can't work in the fields lately. What's going on?" Tristan sighed. He grabbed Rosalyn's hand gently, and she could feel him trembling. I keep thinking about what happened back there." His voice was hushed, almost strained. About her. It was something Rosalyn had been afraid of for a while. "Tristan, you know what she did to you. You nearly lost yourself to her. If it hadn't been for Soren, we likely both would have been dead." The appeal to reason worked only slightly. "I know," Tristan said. I just think we could have done something. Worked out something more peaceful. Tristan, she was sadistic. She manipulated you to meet her own needs." She reached a hand up to his face to make him meet her eyes. She wouldn't have listened to peace negotiations. She wanted to torture you by watching her kill us. And that's not including her being something closer to a demon than a true unicorn. Tristan sighed. Rosalyn pulled her hand away and his face fell. It doesn't mean we couldn't have tried. Rosalyn was unnerved. She couldn't imagine what Tristan had gone through and what was currently going through his mind, but none of these new happenings pleased her. It was clear that Serena's influence over him was strong, and Tristan did not seem keen to break free of it on his own. Rosalyn wondered what she could do, and two options presented themselves to her. Go back and make sure Serena was actually dead, or consult Soren and Friar Jacobs as to ways to break Tristan free. Rosalyn stayed a little while longer and tried speaking about other things with Tristan. He replied to no other statements besides questions about his wounds, and they were simply the bare minimum of, they seemed to be doing okay. Rosalyn stayed until well after nightfall and left Tristan to himself, telling his parents that she would be around again the next evening to check on his progress. They replied that she was welcome back any time she wanted to be with Tristan. Rosalyn had just left the house and begun walking home when she heard a rustling noise from behind the house. She waited for a while and realized that someone was walking slowly away from Alindria. She ran around the house and found Tristan walking through the fields towards the forest. "Tristan!" she called out. "Tristan!" Tristan walked slowly and jerkily as though in a dream. Rosalyn ran as fast as she could and grabbed hold of Tristan's arm. The sudden shaking as Rosalyn firmly grasped him seemed to waken him, and he turned around to Rosalyn with a look of confusion on his face. "Rosalyn," he said, "what are you doing out here?" "I could ask you that myself," Rosalyn said. "You were going back to the forest, weren't you?" Tristan seemed shocked, but offered neither resistance nor denial. "You can't go back there," Rosalyn said, "not after everything you've done." Tristan nodded. Rosalyn and Tristan went back to the house, and Rosalyn asked if she could stay the night. Tristan seemed to be taking things a little harder than expected. Tristan's parents, who were fond of Rosalyn and worried for Tristan, agreed quickly, and brought out a cot they kept for emergencies. They found a few spare pillows and blankets and placed the cot in Tristan's room, and sent another one to their sons with a note to Rosalyn's parents that she was staying with Tristan that evening with their consent. Tristan made no more attempts to break out and return to the forest, but Rosalyn was still worried. Rosalyn explained the incident to Tristan's parents and helped his father install a screen on the outside of the window for an extra barrier. She then left Tristan's house and went directly to the church and Friar Jacobs to see if he could do anything about Tristan's condition. Friar Jacobs was relieved to see Rosalyn back okay, and Rosalyn accepted his offer for prayers of thanks. While Rosalyn was unable to tell him much of her own time in the forest, she was able to relay the details of the struggle with Serena, though only after making him promise he wouldn't tell anyone else. Friar Jacobs' face darkened as she regaled her story and waited patiently until she was finished. When Rosalyn told him the details of the previous night and Tristan's attempted escape to the woods, Friar Jacobs let out a sigh. "I told him to be careful," he said. "I gave him the cross necklace and a prayer to say with it so that he would not be deceived. It seems, while his heart was in the right place, that he failed to heed my advice in the long term, and only used it when it was needed." "It may have helped us both in the long run," Rosalyn said. "He was successfully able to ward off her aggressions until I was woken up and we were both able to escape. But I agree that it has compromised him. Compromised him in a way that surpassed even those in the town when she came here. They were not exposed for so long that their hearts were clouded." "That is true. But," Rosalyn added firmly, "so is the fact that she seemed to have used her magic directly on him." Friar Jacob's face softened. "Yes, dear, you have a point. My apologies. And I am relieved to see you both back." "Your own prayers were well received, I assure you," Rosalyn replied, also much gentler. "For both of us to have come back when no one else has is certainly a miracle of some sort." "That is true, but it shall take more than a simple miracle to break Tristan from her spell. He keeps trying to run away into the woods. I'm afraid to leave him alone for very long." "And you are right to be afraid as such. But as it stands, I cannot do anything for Tristan except pray." Rosalyn sighed. "That is what I was afraid of. Your prayers are good, but they do not seem to prevent Tristan's pull back to that place. Serena is weakened, but not so much she won't be able to turn him and use him, even without me as a sort of lure. That is something all the more worrying. If Tristan remains in this state, with the power he gained during his quest to save you, then we are in danger of this all happening once again. The last thing she needs is a willing servant, and especially one as strong and devoted as Tristan could possibly make. But that answers none of the questions I have. How can we keep Tristan from going back? Rosalyn, I must ask, do you still love him? But of course, and I do so all the more knowing he risked his life to save me. Then perhaps it is necessary to return the favor. Go to Tristan. You need not marry, but if you still love each other, perhaps some reminder of your love will shake him free, or at least prevent him from going back." Do you mean we are to live together? You two are adults now. It was plain to the whole town how much you two were in love with one another. I am sure no one would object to you living together unmarried. But the first path to clearing Tristan's mind would be to show him you still care for him, that you still love him. I wish there is something more we could do, Rosalyn said. I should like to give Serena a piece of my mind. Friar Jacob saw a fire in the woman's heart as she spoke of getting back at the enchantress. While he usually disapproved of such actions from women, he found himself sympathetic to her, and her actions were quite justified. Hers was not a powder keg like Tristan's had been, but a slow-burning fire that would be focused on its goal. It was better to help direct that focus than to stamp it out, to raise it rather than extinguish it. I cannot offer you many solutions as yet, Friar Jacobs told her, but live with Tristan and remind him how much you love him. In the meantime, I shall look up the known ways of defeating such creatures. When I have solutions, I shall let you know. Oh, thank you, dear Friar, Rosalyn said, pleased by the answer. Then, with your approval, I should go. I am sure both my parents and his would approve. They gained much more than their approval. Rosalyn explained her talk with Friar Jacobs and gained both her own parents' and Tristan's parents' support for them moving in together. Together with Friar Jacobs, they all helped choose and furnish an apartment in Alindria for them to live in, close enough to the bakery for Rosalyn, and close enough to the farm for Tristan to continue working to raise money for living expenses. Within a week of her talk with the friar, Rosalyn and Tristan had moved into an apartment and were living together. A routine was quickly established. In the mornings, Rosalyn would make breakfast and help Tristan rise and prepare himself for the day. Tristan's father would come and pick him up, and they would go to the farm, while Rosalyn went to work at the bakery. In the evenings, Rosalyn would come home, and Tristan's father would bring him home, and then Rosalyn would make them dinner. After dinner came their social time. Rosalyn and Tristan would read together, invite friends over to play games, walk about the more festive sections of town, or simply sit and talk about their days and what their plans for later were. Rosalyn was gentle and kind with Tristan, and never said an unkind word to him during the evenings. She tried as hard as she could to direct his thoughts away from Serena as much as possible, though sometimes would ask him about the task he did trying to help heal her poison. In the evenings they would lie in bed together, and they would fall asleep, Rosalyn gently cradling Tristan. Slowly but surely, Tristan began to awaken from the spell. He became less restless and didn't wander aimlessly toward the forest as much. His pauses during work at the farm began to lessen and became more responsive and aware of his surroundings. He slowly began to open up once again to Rosalyn, and even enjoyed the company of their card games or of dinners with his or Rosalyn's family. But Tristan wasn't normal. Rosalyn's care of him was clearly a balm, not a curative effort. Tristan still sometimes woke up in the middle of the night and stared out toward the forest almost longingly. Once when they were cleaning the house, Rosalyn heard Tristan humming the tune of her enchanting song, though when pressed he could not remember where he heard it. Sometimes he would obsess about her in small ways, reading things about unicorns and their powers, or about the old underground city, or the monastery on the mountain. And there were some days where he would just not work, where he'd remain lying in bed with a faraway look in his eye that Rosalyn could only barely break him out of for breakfast and dinner. There were small breakthroughs. Once when Tristan was in the middle of his almost trance-like days, Rosalyn came home and cooked a beef stew and came in to give it to Tristan. Instead of calling out numerous times for him to awaken, Rosalyn only had to call his name once for Tristan to turn his head and notice her. "Rosalyn," he said. "Hey." Rosalyn set the bowl of beef stew on the table next to the bed and sat down next to him. "How are you feeling?" "Like I just woke up," he said. "I still dream of her, you know. Sometimes it feels like I just can't wake up from those dreams. Like I don't want to." Rosalyn nodded. This was usual, one of the temporary obsessions. "Do you want to go back there?" Tristan took a long time to think. "I'm not sure," he finally replied. "I miss her, but I love you. I did all those tasks for you, you know. All of it was so you could come back to me." Rosalyn bent down and they kissed. It was warm but weak, like Tristan didn't have much strength or energy. But Tristan smiled at her like he hadn't for a long time, and Rosalyn could have believed he was fighting against the effects of the spell. She smiled too. "Do you think she would have been truly nice once?" Tristan asked. Rosalyn shrugged. "Maybe. It's difficult to know sometimes. Maybe something cracked. Or maybe she never was that way at all. It seems weird. The idea that something taking form of something so pure could be so malicious. It feels like she might have been nice once. Otherwise she couldn't have been able to look like that. At least he was no longer being delusional and thinking her blameless. Maybe, Rosalyn conceded again, but we don't know. And anyways, I think she was too far gone for her to be truly nice again. Tristan nodded. She may have liked me. I don't know if she completely changed for me, but I know she liked me. And I liked her, too. I think she could have been a good person once. Maybe, just maybe, there's something good in her that showed up back then. It was drowned out by all those other things. Do you think you could change that? Tristan sat in silence for another long while. Rosalyn was just about to leave when he answered. No, he said, but it makes me feel sad for her. The longer it went, the more Rosalyn became afraid. Tristan improved over the next few weeks, but most of his old habits never went away. He still stared out the window, and still had his more comatose days. When the spaces became farther in between, there was a vague sense they were getting deeper and longer. It took longer for Rosalyn to waken from those dreamlike states, and he took longer to recover from them. One evening, Tristan was in bed, and Rosalyn was working on mending a hole in Tristan's pants when she saw a faint blue glow off in the distance. It looked like it was close to the forest, but enough on the plain it wasn't at all hidden. She found herself curious about it, went to see if Tristan was asleep. She gathered the torch and informed the downstairs guard to make sure Tristan didn't leave, then took the torch and headed down Alindria's main street towards the glow. A short distance outside the town, Rosalyn saw the source of the glow. Soren was standing there and seemed to be looking for something. Upon recognizing the dark gray and blue unicorn, Rosalyn picked up her pace and approached him. Soren looked towards Rosalyn, and his face softened. My fair lady, he said gently, it is a pleasure to see you in such health. I wish I could say the same, Rosalyn replied. You look tense and are out of your forests. Is there something that bothers you? I have meant to check on you for a while, but I had other business to attend to. The forest is mostly purified, and the town Alexander was from has been informed of his death. He is considered honorable for his actions. That is good news to hear, but I sense there is an underlying problem. There is indeed, Soren said gravely. I am not afraid to speak plainly to you. It is probably clear to you the enchantress was not killed, merely weakened from your efforts. She went into hiding, but I cannot find her. I can roam a bit more freely, but I cannot drive her presence out completely. She has had a long history of absorbing the energy from those who came in, and is quite powerful. I am not surprised. Her hold on Tristan is quite strong. I am afraid he will disappear one day when I am not looking and try to go for the forests. But your fears are not unreasonable. But tell me, what exactly are his symptoms? It's been nearly 2 months now since your release from the hospital, so I've heard. He sometimes stays up late looking at the forest, or falls into a catatonic state thinking of nothing but her. It plagues him like an obsession, and it's difficult to change his state of mind once it gets there. And over 2 months after the spell was laid? I'm afraid most of all that it will never leave. Soren eyed Rosalyn warmly. You love him dearly, don't you? More than anything. We were going to marry one day. Our parents agreed to it even before I was to come of age. Tristan was patient and waited for me to grow instead of running off after other women, and I have eyes for him alone. I can't bear to see him like this. Rosalyn stopped. She surprised herself with how close to crying she was. Her eyes were watering, and she felt like she was choking every time she tried to speak. Soren said nothing, waiting patiently for her to continue. She let herself sob a few times and felt a few tears roll down her cheeks. Once some of the tension was released, she dabbed her eyes dry with her clothes, feeling much better. I won't let him stay like this, she said, her voice harder and firmer. I want to help him. I want to get my revenge on that unicorn. For what she did to him, for what she did to all those other girls and their lovers, and for me. Soren smiled. If anyone can do it, I believe you can. You two are perfectly matched for each other in more ways than one. The same fire, the same spirit, the same devotion. Whatever you put your mind to, there is nothing to dissuade you from finishing it. Rosalyn nodded. Yes. If it were not for that, then I would be dead at her power. And I believe he is fighting against her even now. But he can't do it alone. No, he can't, Soren agreed. It would be foolish to assume so. Neither can you. So what am I supposed to do? I cannot sit around here doing nothing, but I don't know where to begin. The dark gray unicorn walked off a short distance and looked towards the woods. The way is already paved before you, he said. Stay true to the path and you will make your way to its end. You are no longer speaking plainly. Soren turned back to Rosalyn and smiled. You do not expect me to do everything for you. Hints make the mind move. turn the gears and allow for thinking. I have given you a guidepost. It is up to you to blaze your own trail." Rosalyn was amused, but not irritated. "I see why Tristan has become confused by you. Your normal way of giving information is infuriating," she said playfully. "Perhaps," Soren said, with as much of a shrug as a horse-like being could give. But he still learned from it. And he trotted away into the woods. Rosalyn returned to Elindria feeling less comforted than before. Soren's words were not promising and left her grasping at straws. It was more than she had before, but reminded her just how huge her problem really was. Back at the apartment, Rosalyn checked with the guard and was satisfied that Tristan had not left. She walked back up to the apartment and got herself a cool drink of water and went to the bedroom. She climbed into bed with the sleeping Tristan and lay with him for a long while, stroking his head and just staring at him in the moonlight. A thought occurred. Tristan had gone to Friar Jacobs before he went to pursue her in the woods. Perhaps another visit to the good friar would be fruitful to seek what advice he sought from him and what they talked about. Wasn't that what Soren had said, in so many words? So the very next morning, Rosalyn made sure that Tristan was on his way, then went immediately to the church. Friar Jacobs was sitting in his small library off to the side, and was surprised to see Rosalyn at that time, but welcomed her in warmly. They went to his house, and he made her a cup of tea, and they sat down at his table to talk. "Friar Jacobs," Rosalyn began, "Tristan came to you before he went off to face the Enchantress, yes?" "Why, yes, he did. But why do you want to know?" "I think I figured something out. Please bear with me for 1 second. When he came to you, what did he want to know?" "Well, he didn't really know about the background of the Enchantress. I told him the stories, and he asked me if there was anything he could do about her." Friar Jacobs gasped. "But wait. I had a vision, and he certainly fulfilled it as much as he could. Upon receiving that vision, I told him a prayer and gave him a cross, the combination of which would reveal the Enchantress's true form." "Then he must not have put on the cross when he went to face the Enchantress," Rosalyn commented. "And he did not say the prayer when he confronted her and awakened me from her power. Perhaps her power over him would have dissipated, or even not have been given a foothold if he wore that cross or said the prayer." "That is perhaps so," Friar Jacob said. "My dear, you have hit upon an excellent point, something that, in the hubbub and excitement of the last few weeks, I would not have come to. That is this. Tristan's heart was in the right place, but apparently it was not he who I saw would defeat the Enchantress, but you. That is all well and good, but a vision means nothing without a means to act on it. Once more, you are quite right, and to aid you in this endeavor, I have the information you sought from me last time. To defeat one of these creatures completely, you must stab it in the heart. Any material will do, but anywhere else will simply heal over in seconds, and what would be a fatal blow anywhere else would merely slow them down for a little while." Rosalyn thought about this for a while. "Tell me, what was the prayer you taught Tristan?" Friar Jacobs repeated the words back to her, and he wrote them down on a piece of paper when Rosalyn asked him to. She took the paper home and found Tristan's old cross pendant and the amulet from the forest. She hid them somewhere safe, then went to work as usual for the rest of the day. Back at home, Rosalyn prepared a meatloaf and potatoes for herself and Tristan, and they went about their usual business. Tristan was melancholic and didn't talk much throughout dinner, but perked up when Rosalyn mentioned Soren. "You spoke with him?" Rosalyn was pleased it was not completely about Serena. "Yes," she said. "He wishes you well and hopes you are feeling better." Tristan looked down at what was left of the meatloaf and potatoes that Rosalyn had cooked. "I wanted to talk with him a while back, but then I looked out at the forest and forgot about him." "He has not forgotten you," Rosalyn said warmly. "I am sure he would want to see you again, but he can wait until you feel better." Tristan poked at his potatoes with his fork. "I feel so weak," he said. "I want to tell him that. I want to tell him thank you for everything, because I wouldn't have done it all without him. I didn't really get the chance to tell him." "He understands," Rosalyn said, reaching a hand over and placing it comfortingly on Tristan's shoulder. "I told him thank you for both of us. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here either." Tristan nodded. He smiled, but it soon faltered and he hid his eyes. "I hate living like this," he choked out. "I hate being useless. I hate becoming lost. And I hate wanting to go back to her." He was trying as hard as he could to fight it. Rosalyn wanted to say something to him, but when Tristan looked up, it was such a look of abject depression that she was stunned. His eyes were red and filled with tears, and she could see all the wear and tear of his time in the forest showing on his face. "You don't know what it was like," he said quietly. "Serena," her words were like a warm fire filling my being. The empty spaces felt cold and unwanted. They were not just loving and kind, they were those feelings incarnate. To be without them was to be without something to fall back on. But they never left. They were always a reminder that she was there, waiting for me. Tristan. It was the first time he had ever talked about how it felt, and it surprised Rosalyn greatly. Soren, Tristan continued. Soren was the cold. But it was more than just the cold. It wasn't just cold, but a restoration of balance. As much as words confused me, I felt better for having heard them. But the warmth was addictive. I wanted to bury myself inside of it. I still do. Sometimes when I wake up at night, I feel cold and long to just hear her speak because it will drive the cold away. And what about me? I feel your warmth too. But you are like Soren, a balance. If it wasn't for you, I'd have gone back in a heartbeat. You take care of me. I feel so ashamed. I promised I would take care of you, and I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. Oh, Tristan, Rosalyn sighed, but you did do it. You gathered the ingredients that cured me from her poison. I did it for her. I did it because she told me to. Because while I couldn't take care of you, she could seemingly take care of both of us. Rosalyn thought about this. No wonder Tristan was so melancholic lately. Serena's enchantment wasn't just relying on her own natural charm, but on Tristan's own inadequacies about the situation. He wanted her not just because she bewitched him, but because he felt worthless in his own eyes without her approval. Rosalyn, Tristan asked, why didn't she kill you outright? Why did she wait for me? It was a question that Rosalyn could not answer. She originally thought it was just for torturing Tristan, but after a while that explanation faltered. She could have killed her right away, and still used her as bait with magic to simulate a living thing, only for her to lose her life and die when Tristan seemed so close to completing his quest for her. But instead she kept her alive and allowed Tristan to go through the whole thing and actually rescue her. Perhaps she sensed our feelings, Rosalyn suggested. Maybe if she had her way, we would both serve her as thralls. Together just enough to feel safe, but subject to her whims. But even she did not feel sure about that answer. Tristan remained up for a while afterwards, then Rosalyn led him to bed when it seemed like Tristan might go into one of his obsessive trances. Once Tristan was in bed, Rosalyn picked out the clothes that would best suit her for exercise, and laid him out. She found Tristan's old armor, sword, and shield, hidden away in one of their closets, and polished them all until they were well cleaned, then went to bed. Before she went to bed, she knelt down and prayed the short prayer Friar Jacobs had given her. O heavens, grant me strength for the task now ahead. Give me courage to fight what I fear and dread. May these dark lies repeal, true intentions reveal. Guide my heart and my head, and my feet where they tread. Here ends Chapter 8. Next week, The Knight and the Unicorn, Chapter 9.